Welcome to Consults Over Coffee. I'm Dr. Michael Jones. That piece of music is entitled Absinthe and a Cracker from the musical duo of Trey Gunn and Pat Mastelotto, known as 2TU. These gentlemen are extremely talented musicians who are constantly exploring and pushing musical boundaries. My prog rock friends will know them from King Crimson, but they've been involved in a wide variety of musical projects over the years. I was fortunate enough to be able to chat with Trey Gunn about his musical career, touch guitar, and the search for our unique original voice. I think you're really going to like this. Check it out. All right, well, welcome to another Consults Over Coffee. I'm Dr. Michael Jones, and I am joined tonight by one of my favorite musicians, Trey Gunn. And you're in Seattle right now, right?
I am in Seattle, and I'm in Seattle right now.
All right, all these things are true. And I think most people who would know you probably first came across you through your work with Robert Fripp and Crimson and the Crimson projects.
I think that's fair to say.
But you've got this incredible body of work that you've done. I mean, what, about 15?
I do. Do you want to see it? Here's my entire body of work.
All on one hard drive.
40 years right there, buddy. Yeah, I've been digitizing all my audio tapes during the quarantine, and now everything's on a little hard drive.
I hope you've backed it up.
I do. I have 5 backups, and 2 of them are not in the house. And I'll tell you this amusing thing. I was just traveling a couple of weeks ago, and I'm so uptight about the files. Like my daughter has a set, my girlfriend has a set. Well, I mean, a set is just one of these. And then I have 3 copies here at home that I work with. When I'm working, I always keep triplicate. And when I go out of town, I stick them in my fire safe just to be safe. And I stashed the 3rd one somewhere, and I haven't been able to find it. I don't know where I put it. But it's going to turn up. It's going to turn up. But I found 2 of them. So I have 4 of the 5 right now. And the other one is, I did a last minute hide, which I should never do.
Yeah, if that's the decay curve, man, you're in trouble. Better make another copy.
So yeah, I've done a lot of different things.
Yeah, you have, and actually you've kind of taken an interesting path, because you started out playing piano in Texas as a kid, right?
Yeah, piano,
and now primarily war guitar and
now I play this. Yeah, I don't play the Chapman stick anymore. I play what's called, in the family of touch guitars, which is all this tapped style of playing on the fretboard with both hands. That's my technique, and I've gone through several different instruments since I really started doing that about 1987, when I kind of left guitar and bass behind. I went to these tapped instruments, and I still play them. Yeah.
Were you playing bass primarily before you crossed over, or?
I think I felt like mostly like bass was my strongest thing. I was also playing guitar, and I had a background in keyboards, but I never really played keyboards in bands or professionally. It was just more for recording or just writing, and it's kind of a tool that I have. I enjoy playing the piano, but I don't play it on. I don't play it on anyone else's records. Let's put it like that. So yeah, bass and guitar to a degree. And then I started to take guitar a little more seriously when I began working with Fripp in the guitar craft school. And then I switched over to this super hybrid instrument. This tapping technique it's absolutely unique. It doesn't, even though it looks like a guitar, it's not approached like a guitar. So it's a cross between like playing percussion, like hand percussion, keyboard, and guitar. And because it has bass strings and guitar strings, I don't really think of myself as one or the other anymore. It's just whatever range of the instrument or whatever role I'm playing in a particular project.
Do you, for either for touch guitar or a Chapman stick, I guess being a type of touch guitar, right? I mean,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the is it set up in a sense like of piano, sort of left hand, right hand for bass melody?
Yes and no. Yes and no. Yes, there's bass strings. There's a group of bass strings. The traditional. I'm making air quotes because everybody's got all the
Right.
instruments are kind of custom made, and everybody does their own weird thing. But the traditional is the left hand has the bass strings, and then the right hand has the melody strings. And but the thing is, the bass strings go quite because they're tuned in fifths. They go high very quickly. So it's really the very old school Chapman stick playing was you're grabbing bass notes and a couple of chordal notes with the left hand, and then the right hand can play melody. I don't play it like that at all. I just look at it as a big giant marimba or an mbira or something. And if I'm in the bass, if I need to be playing bass now, I bring both my hands down to the bass strings. If I'm playing a solo, I bring both my hands up to the melody side. So that's kind of where I guess I kind of diverged pretty early on with the traditional path. I'm using air quotes again because it's such an untraditional instrument, but
Yeah.
there is this traditional, the kind of core tradition was almost like you say, like a solo jazz pianist, and you're
Yeah.
covering chords, melody, and bass. I don't play like that. I was never very good at that, and I thankfully wasn't interested in it because it felt like I would never actually be that good at that. So I kind of went my own way.
But you've been doing it now for what, 30 years?
34
More?
years.
More.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
And we're really just figuring it out. Marcus Reuter and I, and a partner of mine who plays his own, he has his own version of this instrument. He calls the touch guitar. That's a little more streamlined version of what I have. And we have been, we're still diddling with the technique. Probably it's still got a ways to go to figure out what's unique about the way of playing it that's not like a bass and a guitar, and to get the most out of it.
It really is its own thing. It's just, and it
Yeah,
just
it
seems
really
like the
is. It really is.
possibilities.
You're almost at a disadvantage as a guitar player thinking of it as a guitar. We have to unlearn you how you approach the strings, but it can be done. And Marcus has a really great approach for that.
It's interesting to me because obviously, I mean, we're talking about probably one of the more complex instruments to play and to master.
Mm.
And you've clearly done this at a very high level for a very long time.
Mm.
But you started out like a lot of people, like playing in a band in a high school, right? I mean,
Absolutely, punk rock bands, rock bands. Actually, one of the ways that I really learned the instrument, because for me it was a kind of a new tuning too. I tune it all in fifths, and guitar and bass are generally tuned in fourths. So
right.
the instrument is tuned like a cello and a violin. And when I realized the first time I put the instrument on, Robert Fripp lent me one of his that he had when I was living in England there. And I put it on, I was like, this is awesome. This is the thing I've been like trying to do, but I've been on the wrong instrument all this time. And it was amazing. And then about like 3 or 4 days later, I started to realize how much work was involved. I was like, shit, this is years and years and years. So anyway, the short story of how I actually got myself kind of fluid on the instrument, I would say is the word, and comfortable putting myself in new situations and have it just be my instrument. Was I was living in New York at the time. I said, well, this is my instrument. And I went on about 100 auditions for all sorts of bands. And I just showed up with that instrument. I didn't even tell people I was coming with it. I went for bass auditions. I went for guitar auditions. I went for rock band auditions, country Western bands. I went to an Irish band and showed up, and they were like, what's going on? And I couldn't, although I can read music very well, I didn't really know where all the notes were. So that's how I kind of got my footing on it, was just putting myself in a situation and going,
where you had to play it.
yeah, like here we are, and it was the kind of auditions where, like in New York at the time, I don't know what it's like now, there would be like 20 guys in the hallway waiting their turn.
Wow.
So you go in and you've got like 10 or 15 minutes, and then the next guy's in, so, and everyone's listening to you. So it's pretty high pressure in a way, but in another way, I just thought I got to put myself in the fire. Otherwise, what other choice do I have? I'm not going to sit around and practice for 10 years and then come out of the closet. I'm just going in the fire.
Throw yourself out of the boat.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
How did you get from punk rocker to touch guitar and basically pretty high, I mean, prog rock? I mean, like,
yeah, King Crimson.
I mean,
yeah. Well, I guess I just kind of, there were no, doors opened along the way, but it was very, very progressive. Ha ha ha. Actually, I feel like my career was a very slow, gentle ascend, and then descend, and then ascend, descend. But it wasn't there. I didn't have an early explosion. I didn't have a hit record when I was 19 or 20. I've never had a hit
prodigy.
Record. Yeah. I've never had a gold record. So I just kind of moved from situation to situation. And, I don't know, I practiced and trained myself. And when I wasn't working with somebody else, I was working on my own stuff, which is still the case.
It's interesting. It seems like a pretty big pivot to move from the world of punk rock to King Crimson.
I don't think so. In a certain way, yes, I get it in a certain way, but because the punk aesthetic is, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't care. And I'm going to shout at you what I'm doing, but there's also a lot of attitude. Like if you don't have the attitude, you're not doing it. And that's really what makes rock music its thing. I think it's the attitude. If you don't, you have to bring an attitude into the music, and Crimson has that in spades. It's just very specific characteristics in the music, and it's a very involved process of making the music, because you're not just and I had a lot of experience with this kind of strategy myself. You're not just bringing your weird instrument and playing this weird music. You're actually building every element of the music kind of from scratch. You're building the rhythmic language. You're building the harmonic language, the melodic language, and the sounds. You're not pulling anything off the shelf and saying, "Oh, this is how you do it." You're kind of starting with a couple of general precepts and then building all the language from scratch. Is the best way to say it.
And that's I think the thing for me to kind of go, okay, how do you get from punk rock to that, which is punk rock? I mean, what's the a couple chords, a lot of attitude.
Yeah.
And this, if music is math, I look at prog rock, and prog rock specifically Crimson, the stuff that you do, as being this kind of calculus.
In a certain way, yeah, certainly rhythmically, but also, and there's been a lot of different guys in Crimson, and not everybody takes the same approach that I did, and that Robert does, and probably my approach has a lot of affinity with Robert's in terms of looking at how the chords are made up and choosing what kinds of chords and how you're going to make your chords. I don't know that Adrian thinks that way, but that's fine, and I'm sure Greg Lake didn't think that way. But I do kind of tend to approach maybe more like a classical musician when it comes to what kind of materials are you going to work with.
But that's you have a degree in classical composition, right?
Yeah, I do.
I
I do.
mean, not that they're like, oh, well, that's why you do what you do, but right. I mean,
No, it's more the other way around. I wanted to study so I could figure out. I mean, the reason why I wanted to study music was because I thought if you were going to be a writer, you would want to know how grammar works, and then you could,
right.
And so that's all it was for me. That, and also I wanted to learn, like, why does Stravinsky sound like this? What's going on, and why is Bartok like this? And so I was curious about the big classical pieces. So I did study that, and it certainly helped it helped and hindered. It's everything's a double-edged sword. It all depends on how you use it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's either a guidepost or a constraint.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so, and so to that
No,
same,
I only say that in that it's not. There's no way is that necessary. Adrian didn't go to college for music, and he rocks it. And so it's just that's just my pathway. Pat Masalato didn't do the same thing. Tony Levin did, but I don't think he ended up kind of doing a more going into the jazz world. I don't know. Tony played with Stravinsky.
did he really?
Yeah, Stravinsky came and conducted once when he was in the symphony orchestra at his school. But anyway, I'm just throwing that out there. It's certainly not essential to be a part of music as complicated as people hear it.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the thing, and this kind of gets to the other concept, and one of the things I really I think is an important thing. You have the idea of this concept of original voice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's your teaching program, your
Yeah,
coaching
yeah,
program.
coaching program. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to comment on that a little bit? I mean, I think it's important stuff for folks.
Yeah, how shall I comment about it? I guess I'll tell you my personal biases. And one of the things that I did when I was one of the risks that I went through when I was studying music in college was that, and especially once I got into the composition program, was that I realized that I was kind of writing to my teacher's biases, and that really I just was trying to figure out what the rules were. And pretty early on, I realized, oh, that they would say, oh, we don't do this, or we don't do this kind of chord, or we don't use this. I was like, oh, that's weird, because I was just playing a gig the other night and we did that.
Yeah, exactly.
So what I decided to do in order to not get too infected by it, because I still wanted to do the work and I just wanted to practice writing, was I started to make a list of all the biases, or the rule book, which is basically you're assigned a composition teacher and they're going to approve you or not. So you can't be too you have to fit, so I started making a list of all these biases. So anyway, some of my biases in terms of original voice, I think that there's a value in doing your own thing and finding your own way, regardless of what your friends or your family or your culture thinks. And I totally understand a musician wanting to become a Texas swing guitar player or a jazz bassist or a klezmer a clarinetist. I totally get it. But for me, that's just not what I personally value. And I feel like um, there's a value to kind of not pulling a curriculum or a style or a genre off the shelf and having that be your thing. And although that's a great way to get flexible as a musician on your instrument, I'm going to do jazz guitar now, and I've done all these different things as well. But I feel like there's a virtue in um, finding your own way. And so much so that's kind of what I coach to. I mean, people come to me with all sorts of different issues. They can be creative blocks or technical questions about the instrument or technical questions about rhythm or this and that. But for me, I'm kind of always coaching to um, what do you want to do? What do you really want to do? And how do you make a plan to get there? Which for me is the why I actually use this term, a coaching model instead of a teaching model. For me, a teaching model is I have secrets that you want to know, and now I show them to you. And I came to this coaching model, and I taught for many years, very unsuccessfully. Like people would come to me and ask me what to do, and I would tell them what to do as a teacher, and they would go away, and I'd never see them again. I was like, huh, okay. But then once I got this coaching model in my head, which is it's not about what I know, because how silly is it for me to show you what I do and you start doing what I do? I'm 30 years ahead of you. I'm better at it than you will ever be. Okay, maybe there's some things, little things you want to learn that I have that I know, but really the question is, where are you going to go? Where does your voice want to go? What are the things that interest you? Where are you curious about? And what's your pathway there? So that's kind of where this thing original, and when I was growing up, there was always this thing of trying to be original. How like the most original bands were the most exciting bands. I don't know what it's like for a young musician anymore, but that does not feel like what's in the atmosphere anymore. And so almost what's in the atmosphere is kind of it's not so harsh as everything's been done. There's so many amazing musicians doing everything everywhere. How could I possibly offer something unique? Well, we can actually, all of us can. It's just a matter of finding the toolbox that really fits your thing, and um, not just kind of reactively grabbing tools.
Yeah.
And when I say tools, I mean chords or whatever. I mean, it could be that you're not interested in chords. For a long time, I wasn't interested in harmony at all. I was just interested in modes and rhythm, and that's totally legit. And you should follow whatever it is, follow it up. I have a drummer who works with me who just started working with rhythm for a long time. That's cool.
It
So that's kind of it's a big discussion, but that's kind of the background of that you can find your own voice in a certain way. How could you not find it? Well, the only way you can kind of lose it is to get distracted by everything outside of you.
yeah. But I think it is. It's also kind of a moving target. I mean, right? Who
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's where it becomes tricky, and that's where it really does help having a coach. And I wish I had my own coach actually for that, because it is a moving target, and there's never you're how I tend to look at it is like if you're really this kind of a musician, and it's kind of a specialized thing to say I'm gonna walk away from a lot of stuff. Well, I don't know if you know this guitarist Wayne Krantz. Do you know Wayne Krantz?
Mhm.
Yeah, Wayne's a perfect example. He had these amazing bebop chops, and he walked away from them in order to find his own thing. And he never would have found it if he hadn't walked away from his bebop chops. So there's a little bit of that, like he could play guitar really well, but then he wanted to find his own thing, and he kind of had to close the door to some stuff. So that can be a challenge.
It's funny. I had this conversation with a friend of mine last night. We were listening to I'm blanking on his name, but it was I was like Johnny A, who was a guitarist up in Boston, who was commercially doing very well in a more traditional path.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of went, nah, you know what? He really just kind of went off and did this instrumental guitar thing, and it's really good, but he gave up. I mean, he turned his back on a lot of commercial success.
Yeah.
But to pursue what's more honest to him.
Right.
And
And
that
that's
is,
that's the punishment. That's the punishment that comes.
it could be a tough
Yeah,
decision. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. I mean, the truth is, there are innovators who become very successful, but at least in the culture nowadays, people really they say they want creative leaps from their musicians, but really they want to hear something they already are familiar with. That's a gross exaggeration, but it's very true that this path that I'm talking about doesn't necessarily guarantee you success. Although it is the way to find the unique, to find a unique sound.
and it doesn't prohibit you from taking, the country music gig that
No,
pays
no,
pretty well
yeah,
and lets you do the other stuff. It's just
yeah,
right.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I think, one, I think people in the community a lot of times, certainly, and I know a lot of folks who are sort of daunted by the idea of learning to play an instrument, learning to paint, trying to write creatively, whatever. And the concepts that you're putting out there really apply to whether it's someone at your level or whether it's someone, some kid at home going, you know what, I want to be a bass player.
Or any art form.
Yeah.
The truth is any art form. You have to learn how to play in your field. You have to choose what your field is, and then you have to learn how to play it. It's no different when we were like 5.
Yeah.
And it's in that play where you I don't know, something happens that you're not thinking up. And then the question is now, is that enough for you? For a lot of people, that is enough, but if you want to make something from it, now it becomes a little trickier, or it becomes more complex. How do you bring stuff from the playroom into the workshop?
Let
And
me so let me flip this around. So I suspect, I would imagine that when you were, first playing in bands, did you just have those moments where you were like, this is just it? It doesn't, it doesn't get any better than this.
absolutely, yeah,
Do you
yeah.
still have those moments?
Yeah, yeah. It's different. And it's the thing is, when you're young and you're playing loud music with your friends, it's all pretty awesome.
Yeah.
you know, I'm a professional, so then it's a little bit different, not because I'm packaging consumer wise, but because I'm putting a frame around stuff. So there's a whole craftsman to, taking the pieces of music, producing them, putting the right frame in it, and then putting them out into the world. They're all different. I call them like different hats or different rooms that you work in. And there's a, I don't want to say there's a lot less rejoicing than when you're just in a punk rock band cranking up your amp, but you rejoice in small ways along the way, and then you're done with it, and then you really have a party.
Yeah. Well, because I just kind of think anything you do for at a high intensely for a long period of time, the wow factor kind of fades.
Well, you can't run on that very long. I think
Yeah.
that's the thing, I mean, you do have to have enthusiasm about what you're doing, but you also, and you want to feel good about it, but you also want to be able to work an idea, um, even if it doesn't have those elements, and sometimes you have to work some kind of some ideas that are just, they're kind of average. They're not ones that you can see the whole pathway, or you don't know where it's going, but you have to keep going until something falls into place. And that's maybe even a better example. Like, you just need to keep working with it, even though you don't know where it's going, and maybe you abandon it eventually, or maybe it falls, maybe it just hasn't found its right place yet. but you don't want to lose you don't want to abandon it early because it needs something, but you don't, you know what I mean?
Right. So, well,
you're tracking it.
So sometimes you come back to it 6 months later or whatever, and you go,
oh, 20 years later, 20 years later, I have ideas and scraps of paper that I could run with. And, and then you get, the thing is, the more what you spend your time doing, you get better at. So in a certain way, I could take any of my old crappy ideas and make something that's pretty good. A good idea, you get something better, but yeah, you get flexible and or sometimes you just need the right collaborator. That's the other thing that's awesome about music. That's different than, I think, more the solitary arts like writing or painting. You have an idea, but you're not with the right collaborator for it. So you just kind of hang around until oh, you know what would work with us? Let's try this.
Yeah, it has to fall on fertile ground, right?
Yeah.
But that's, I think it's interesting that it's clear that you're still obviously, it's not a grind. I mean, some days it's probably.
Oh, it's a grind. Yeah. It's a grind sometimes. Or what I like to tell people, I had some of my coaching clients that I've had on and off for many years. They're like, when is it going to get easier? Like, this is really a slog. I was like, you know what, guys, it doesn't get easier. It actually doesn't get easier.
There's a great quote, Greg LeMond, the American cyclist, right? Mm-hmm. That's what he used to say. He goes, it doesn't get easier, you just get faster.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, there's parts of the work, sometimes it goes faster or it feels easier. But I mean, writing Crimson music is it's really challenging. Yeah.
Didn't you just do a bunch of Crimson transcriptions? Did you finish that?
Yes, I have a transcriber who's done most of the work. I did all the tabs, and yeah, we transcribed. We did the Thrack record a couple of years ago, but then we just did the whole Discipline era band with the Discipline, Beat, and Three of a Perfect Pair. And yeah, that's a piece of work. That is a grind. And I wasn't the transcriber, but I had to do all the tabs, and we had help and stuff. But
that's a massive project.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing where you commit to it or not. And if you commit to it, then you just deal with everything that comes along the way and do the best you can.
Wow.
It's like they say about filmmaking, that it's the movie's over when the deadline hits. That's how long you get to work on it, and then you have to let it go.
No, that's true. That's true. There's I think it's a Picasso quote about finished. What's finished? To say something is finished is to say it's dead. Mm-hmm. Nothing's ever really finished.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we at least have there's a putting out of the audio. Of course, you can change it again, as we do, and actually one of the things I'm going to do with my old recordings is I'm going to do some remixing. I want to remix a lot of my stuff in quad because it sounds so much better in quad than it does in stereo.
Oh, that's cool.
So, but yeah.
So what are you up to these days? Are you getting ready to go on the road? Or are you playing locally?
Obviously I've been in hiding like everyone else and archiving my stuff. The next particular thing I'm doing is I'm going up to the Three of a Perfect Pair King Crimson camp in Woodstock with Tony Levin and Adrian Ballou and Pat Mastellato, and I'm going to be teaching up there, and then we're going to do a couple of shows at the camp, and then a show in Woodstock. I'm working on a solo record. I am running my record label. I have a record label, 7D Media, and now a sister label, Third Star Records. And I'm coaching musicians. And then in the fall, I do, for the last this will be the fourth or fifth year, I do an extended a group teaching course on the study of modes and hearing and playing and improvisation that I do over the course of 9 weeks last year we had about 100 people. So
yeah. I was one of them.
Shows are not, here and there. I'm not booking any tours at the moment. Yeah.
it's still, everybody's really excited to be back out playing, but I think it's also,
It's a little dodgy,
it's a
you
little
know? It's
dodgy.
actually, like 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't have said that, but this week I'm like, you know what? It's a little dodgy. My friend in
Yeah.
Mexico just caught COVID. He was vaccinated, you know? It's,
Yeah.
it's not, it may not be that bad, but I still don't want it.
No, exactly. So we're really pretty much at our limit here.
Okay.
The I just, the other question I just wanted to pose one final thing, which is, you've had a very successful career in the arts.
Hmm.
Would you recommend that to other people? I
Oh,
mean,
absolutely not. I mean, I recommend the work, but not as a professional life. Nah, nah, no. It's so hard now, and it's so precarious. I mean, if you I look at it the other way, which is, what do you want to do? And if you have a musical path that you're interested, the question isn't, how do I become successful at it? The question really is, how do I organize my life so that I get to do it?
right.
That might mean that you have to become a professional, or most likely nowadays a semi-pro. But that probably means, and especially as a semi-pro, that means you have to have not just a B career, but a side career or a career, and this is what you do in the cracks. And that quite possibly is, I think it's the future, for better or worse. But also it could actually be, it can be frustrating, but it also can be, more liberating, because there's not the pressure on the work to sustain you, and there can be an extra element of freedom. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, guys. I mean, you try. You might be one of the lucky lottery winners, but a lottery winner nowadays is pretty. It's not that it's rare. It's more of you might have something that you could sustain professionally for a while.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different paths. I'm not an expert on it, but my concern, my interest and concern is that musicians make cool music. Does that mean that they have to be pros? Not at all. Not at all anymore. We used to think that, like be able to just spend all day doing it, it's going to make you better. Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Yeah. Be efficient. So, well, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, it's fun. Fun.
And yeah, this has been Consults Over Coffee. I'm Mike Jones. This is Trey Gunn, and we'll be back in another week. Cheers.